The first time I realized my family had written me out of the story, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears, just an envelope on a Tuesday morning slid under my apartment door like a mistake no one bothered to correct. Inside was a cream-colored invitation embossed in gold. My parents' names at the top, my sister's name in the center, and beneath it in smaller lettering that somehow felt louder than anything else, the words that cracked something open in my chest. Please join us in celebrating the wedding of our daughter Claire Whitman. Daughter, singular. I stood barefoot on the cold kitchen tile staring at the invitation while the coffee maker beeped behind me, forgotten. My name was nowhere, not as a guest, not as family, not even as an afterthought. At first I told myself it was a printing error. That had always been my role. The reasonable one. The fixer. The woman who softened the truth so it wouldn't bruise anyone else. But as I turned the envelope over, my hands started to shake. Because printed in the bottom corner in my mother's familiar handwriting were the words that erased any doubt. Please RSVP for one, immediate family only. Immediate. I laughed then. A short, dry sound that didn't belong to me. I was 29 years old, standing alone in a one-bedroom apartment I paid for myself, holding proof that I no longer counted as immediate anything. This is where most people think the story begins. With the wedding. With the betrayal. But the truth is, this story started decades earlier in moments so small, no one thought they mattered. Like the Thanksgiving when I was 10 and my birthday cake never made it to the table because my sister had a piano recital that night. Or the Christmas morning when my parents forgot to put my name on a single gift tag and laughed it off by saying, "You're so independent, we knew you'd understand." Or the promotion I lost at the family company because Claire needed the confidence boost more than I did. This wasn't about a wedding, this was about a pattern. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She didn't answer. I called my father. Straight to voicemail. When Claire finally texted back an hour later, it was just 4 words. Didn't think you'd mind. Mind. I sat down at the kitchen table and pressed the invitation flat with my palm, like I could smooth out the insult if I tried hard enough. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, ordinary life continuing like nothing had shifted. But inside me, something old and quiet finally stood up. By noon, I was at my desk, pretending to work the invitation tucked beneath my laptop like a secret I couldn't stop touching. I worked as a senior analyst at a consulting firm downtown. I was good at my job. Too good. Good enough that people often forgot I was still the youngest one in the room. Good enough that my family had been borrowing my competence for years without ever crediting the source. The irony was sharp. I helped corporations plan hostile takeovers for a living, but I'd never prepared for the one at home. Around 3 in the afternoon, my father finally called. His voice was careful, the way it always was when he wanted something from me. "Your mother said you might be upset." Might. I wasn't invited, I said. I kept my voice steady even. That had always unnerved him more than yelling. There was a pause. Papers rustled on his end. "It's not that simple." "It usually is," I replied. "You either include someone or you don't." He sighed. "Claire's wedding is small. Intimate. You know how your mother feels about keeping things peaceful." Peaceful, that word again, the family's favorite excuse. "So your solution," I said slowly, "was to remove me." Another pause, longer this time. "Your sister's been under a lot of stress," he said. "And with the inheritance situation, tensions are already high. We didn't want complications." That was the moment my coffee turned cold in my stomach. "Inheritance," I repeated. "What inheritance?" Silence. I smiled then. A real smile. Because silence, when it stretches that long, always tells the truth. "You weren't supposed to find out yet," he said finally. "Find out what?" That was the question that followed me for the rest of the day. Through the subway ride home. Through the empty apartment. Through the sleepless night where I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation from the past year with new clarity. My grandmother had died the previous spring. A woman made of iron and perfume and expectations. She'd owned the family business before handing it to my parents, and she'd always told me I reminded her of herself. I used to think that was a compliment. Now I wondered if it was a warning. The next morning, I took a personal day and drove to my parents' house without calling first. The old colonial sat behind a line of manicured hedges like it always had polished and performative. When my mother opened the door and saw me, her smile froze just a fraction of a second too long. Emily, she said like my name surprised her. You should have called. I got the invitation, I replied. Her eyes flicked down to my hand, empty, then back to my face. We were going to explain. Explain why I don't exist anymore. She sighed, stepping aside to let me in. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and control. Everything in its place, including me apparently outside of it. We sat at the kitchen island where I'd done homework as a child while Claire practiced smiling in the mirror. My mother folded her hands. My father stood by the window, not meeting my eyes. It's temporary, my mother said. After the wedding, things will settle. And the inheritance. She inhaled sharply. Your grandmother left conditions. There it was, the hidden truth sliding into the light. Claire will inherit the majority of the estate, she continued. The business shares the lake house. It's what your grandmother wanted. And me. You'll receive a trust, my father said quickly. Modest but secure. Modest? How modest, I asked. They exchanged a look. In that moment, I understood everything. The forgotten birthdays, the missed promotions, the wedding invitation with my name erased. This wasn't neglect, this was strategy. They weren't afraid of my feelings. They were afraid of my competence. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. My mother reached for my arm, then stopped herself. This is for the best, she said. You always land on your feet. I looked at them both, really looked. Two people who had mistaken my silence for surrender my entire life. For the record, I said, my voice calm and clear, I didn't come here to argue. Then why are you here? My father asked. I picked up the invitation from my bag and placed it on the counter between us. I came to let you know, I said, that if I'm excluded, I won't stay invisible. They didn't understand yet, not really, but they would. Because what they didn't know, what none of them had considered, was this. My grandmother hadn't only left an inheritance, she'd left a loophole, and I was the only one who knew how to use it. The day after I left my parents' house, I stopped sleeping. Not in the dramatic tossing and turning way people imagine, but in short, shallow intervals, like my body no longer trusted rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandmother's dining room table long and polished, the place where power was always negotiated in whispers. I'd spent years thinking I was invisible there. Now I understood something worse. I had been visible, I just wasn't valued. By Wednesday morning, I was running on coffee and clarity, which is a dangerous combination when you already know how systems break. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through old emails, contracts, and scanned documents I'd archived without much thought over the years. When you grow up in a family business, you learn early how to keep copies. You learn how memory can be edited. My grandmother Eleanor Whitman had taught me that. She never trusted anyone fully, especially not her own children. When she'd gotten sick, she'd asked me to help organize her personal files, not my parents, not Claire, me. At the time, I'd thought it was because I was good with details. Now I knew it was because she was preparing for war, even from the grave. The will had been executed by a firm downtown, the kind with dark wood offices, and partners who wore silence like armor. I didn't have a copy, not officially, but I remembered the structure. I remembered the clauses she'd made me read aloud, testing whether I understood them. I did. One clause in particular kept echoing in my head. A contingency. Buried. Conditional. Easy to overlook if you weren't trained to hunt for leverage. At 10 in the morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the city records office. The building was beige and forgettable, designed to make you move quickly and ask fewer questions. I requested copies of corporate filings tied to Whitman Holdings, the family company my parents like to call Legacy. Legacy is what people say when they don't want to admit ownership. It took 3 hours and a woman named Denise with tired eyes to pull the documents. When she slid them across the counter, she didn't look at me. People like Denise had seen enough family damage to know when not to get involved. Back in my car, I flipped through the papers slowly, my pulse steady. There it was. My name. Not as an heir. As a trustee. I laughed then. Not because it was funny, but because it was precise. My grandmother hadn't made me the favorite. She'd made me the gatekeeper. Whitman Holdings was structured so that control of certain assets, including the lake house, and a controlling share of the company's voting stock transferred only after a family wedding had been legally completed and registered. A symbolic continuity clause, my grandmother had called it. But the execution required trustee approval. My approval. If conditions weren't met, or if the trustee determined that the transition violated the spirit of the estate, distribution could be delayed, reviewed, challenged. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, the city blurring around me. Claire's wedding wasn't just emotional theater, it was the trigger. And they had cut me out before pulling it. By that afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. My mother, my father. Claire finally leaving a voicemail that was equal parts panic and entitlement. Emily, Mom says you're being dramatic. Can we please not make this harder than it already is? Harder. I didn't call back. Instead, I made an appointment with a lawyer, not the family lawyer. Never the family lawyer. I chose a woman named Ruth Calder, known quietly for dismantling corporate dynasties with a smile and a fountain pen. Her office overlooked the river, and when I explained my situation, she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied me. You know, she said most people in your position want revenge. I met her gaze. I want balance. She nodded once. That's more dangerous. We went through the documents line by line. She confirmed what I already knew. I had authority, not absolute but enough. Enough to stall the inheritance. Enough to demand compliance. Enough to ask questions no one wanted asked. Your family assumed you'd stay quiet, Ruth said. That's their mistake. On the drive home, I passed the bridal boutique Claire had chosen, its windows filled with white dresses and soft lighting. I pictured her inside, surrounded by women who called her radiant, unaware of the quiet collapse forming beneath her feet. That night, I opened my email and drafted a message to my parents. Subject clarification required regarding estate transition. I kept the tone neutral, professional, cold enough to sting. I referenced the clause, the trustee role, the need for full disclosure before any transfer of assets tied to the upcoming marriage. I did not accuse. I did not threaten. I asked for a meeting. Within minutes, my phone rang. My father this time. His voice was tight. You're overstepping, he said. I'm executing my responsibility, I replied. This is family, he snapped. No, I said. This is governance. He hung up. An hour later, Claire texted, What are you doing? I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. Protecting what was entrusted to me. The response came fast. You're jealous. This is about the wedding. I smiled. If only she knew how small the wedding actually was in the larger picture. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, her eyes sharp, her voice trembling with a practiced mix of fear and authority. You're going to ruin everything, she said. People will talk. They already do, I replied. Claire tried a different tactic. She called crying, reminding me of childhood memories that were never as shared as she remembered them. She apologized without apologizing. She promised inclusion after the fact. I listened. Then I said no. Because this wasn't about being invited anymore. It was about being erased. And I had spent too long making myself small to keep other people comfortable. On Friday night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed with a new email. From the law firm handling the estate. Subject trustee confirmation required. The wedding license had been filed early. They were moving faster than expected. I rolled onto my side and smiled into the dark. Let them rush. Rushed decisions make mistakes. And mistakes are where the truth slips through. By the end of the week, I wasn't just excluded. I was indispensable. And they knew it. But what they didn't know yet was this. I wasn't going to stop the wedding. I was going to let it happen. Just not the way they planned. By the following Monday, everyone in my family was pretending nothing was wrong. That was always their favorite strategy. Silence as anesthesia. If they didn't acknowledge the wound, maybe it would stop bleeding on its own. My mother sent me a text about the weather. My father forwarded an article about interest rates like we were still on speaking terms. Claire posted engagement photos online, her smile wide and flawless, the caption full of words like blessed and grateful. She never mentioned my name. I watched it all from a distance, the way you watch a fire once you've stepped outside the building. No panic. No rush to intervene, just observation. At work, I moved through meetings like muscle memory. I presented projections, answered questions, smiled at the right moments. No one noticed the shift because I'd always been controlled. What they didn't realize was that control used to be armor. Now it was a weapon. Every night I documented everything. Dates, messages, voicemails, screenshots. Not because I planned to use them immediately, but because truth has a way of evaporating when families rewrite history. I wasn't going to let that happen again. On Tuesday evening, Ruth called. They've requested an expedited review, she said. That means they're nervous. They should be, I replied. She paused. One more thing, the lake house. My chest tightened. The lake house was the emotional centerpiece of our family mythology. Summer mornings, linen curtains, the illusion of harmony. It was also the single asset my grandmother had protected most aggressively. What about it? I asked. It's tied to a secondary clause, Ruth said. Occupancy rights prior to transfer require trustee acknowledgement. Someone's trying to schedule renovations. I laughed softly. Claire wants to host pre-wedding events there. Without your sign-off, that's a violation. I closed my eyes, picturing my sister walking through those rooms like she owned them the way she always had. Let it proceed, I said. Ruth was quiet. You're sure? Absolutely. After the call, I sat on my couch in the dim light of my apartment thinking about my grandmother. About how she'd sit at the edge of her chair, back straight, eyes sharp, saying things like, people reveal themselves when they think they've won. Claire thought she'd won. By Wednesday, the family group chat came back to life. Claire posting updates, my mother reacting with hearts, my father chiming in with logistics. I stayed silent. Then finally Claire tagged me. There you are, Em. You've been quiet. Big week coming up. I typed, deleted, typed again. Hope it's everything you planned. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Claire. I answered. What's your problem? She demanded, skipping hello. No problem, I said evenly. Don't do that, she snapped. You've been acting weird. Mom's worried. I'm acting appropriate, I replied. For what? She scoffed. For someone who's been excluded from immediate family. There was a sharp inhale. You're still on this. This, I said, isn't a phase. She went quiet. I could almost see her recalculating. You know, she said slowly, if you're trying to punish me, it won't work. People are on my side. That word again, side. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm observing. Observing what? How far you'll go when no one tells you no. She laughed brittle. You sound unhinged. Maybe, I said, but I sound honest. She hung up. On Thursday afternoon, I received an email from the estate firm confirming receipt of my trustee acknowledgement request. I hadn't sent one, which meant someone else had tried. Ruth called me 10 minutes later. They submitted a document with your signature. My heart didn't race. It settled. Forged, I said. Yes. I stared out my office window at the city below, people crossing streets, unaware of the quiet felony unfolding above them. Do we respond? Ruth asked. Not yet, I said. Let them hang themselves. By Friday, the wedding license had been officially filed. The date was locked. The clock was running. That evening, my mother called again, her voice soft in that way she used when she wanted compliance disguised as concern. You don't seem excited, she said. I wasn't invited, I replied. She sighed. Emily, you're being difficult. No, I said. I'm being accurate. There was a long pause. Then her tone shifted colder now. If you interfere with this wedding, she said, you'll regret it. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. That sounds like a threat, I said. She hung up. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. On Saturday morning, I drove out to the lake house. I hadn't told anyone. I still had access. As trustee, I always would. The house was already alive with movement. Catering vans, florists unloading crates, Claire's wedding planner barking orders like she owned the place. When I walked in, conversations stopped. A woman with a clipboard approached me. Can I help you? I'm here to review compliance, I said calmly. Her eyes flicked to my face, then widened slightly. Are you family? Yes, I replied, and no. She didn't understand yet, but she would. Within minutes, Claire appeared, her smile, tight eyes flashing. What are you doing here? She hissed. I own the key, I said, and the authority. You can't just show up. I can, I replied, and I did. People were watching now, staff pretending not to listen. My mother emerging from the back hallway, pale. This is inappropriate, she said. So was forging my signature, I replied loud enough for everyone to hear. The room froze. What? Claire snapped. I held up my phone. We'll discuss it later. I turned to the planner. Proceed as planned, I said. I'm just here to observe. Claire stared at me like I'd grown teeth. And in that moment I saw it. Fear, not of me, of exposure. As I walked through the house room by room, memories brushing against the present, I felt no nostalgia, only clarity. They had built their celebration on the assumption that I would stay quiet. They had mistaken my patience for permission, and the truth was simple. The wedding was coming. The inheritance was waiting, and so was the reckoning. Because when the doors finally closed and the music started and the papers were signed, there would be one final detail they couldn't escape. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was counting. The wedding week arrived like a performance everyone had rehearsed except me. By Sunday evening, the lake house was transformed into something unrecognizable. White tents lined the shoreline, strings of lights draped between old oak trees like borrowed stars. Claire's laughter echoed through rooms that once held quiet conversations and withheld truths. She moved through the house like a queen, reclaiming a throne, greeting vendors by name, issuing instructions with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. I watched from the edges, not hiding, just not inserting myself where I wasn't wanted. That too was a kind of power. On Monday morning, I received a formal email from the estate firm. Polite, neutral, dangerous. Subject request for trustee confirmation regarding asset transition. They wanted my signature, again. I forwarded it to Ruth with a single line, still no response. Her reply came within minutes. Good. Let them escalate. Escalate they did. By noon, my father called. His voice wasn't careful this time. It was sharp, impatient, stripped of pretense. You're enjoying this, he said. I'm documenting it, I replied. You're putting us all at risk. No, I said calmly. You did that when you decided I didn't matter. There was silence. Then quietly, what do you want? That question landed heavier than any threat. I want transparency, I said, and respect. He scoffed. You think this is how you get it? I think this is how I stop being erased. He hung up. That afternoon, Claire cornered me in the kitchen while vendors were distracted outside. She closed the door behind us, her expression tight and furious. You need to back off, she said. You're embarrassing everyone. I wasn't invited, I reminded her. I'm not responsible for your optics. You're always like this, she snapped. Cold, calculating, acting like you're better than us. I met her gaze. I'm not better, I'm just not pretending. Her eyes flicked away for half a second, just long enough. You think you're clever, she said. But you don't understand how this works. Mom and Dad will protect me. That's what you think, I replied. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You'll lose everything if you keep pushing. I smiled. I already lost everything. That's why this doesn't scare me. She left without another word. That night, I took a walk down to the dock alone. The water was dark, still reflecting the lights strung above like a fractured mirror. This place had always been held up as proof of family unity. Summers here were supposed to mean something. Now I saw it clearly. It had always been a stage. My phone buzzed. A message from Ruth. They filed an emergency motion. Forged signature. We're ready. I typed back. Not yet. I wanted them confident, rushed, sloppy. Tuesday brought the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't invited. Instead, I received a courier envelope at my apartment that afternoon. Inside was a printed seating chart. Claire's handwriting circled the head table. My parents, her fiancé, bridesmaids, groomsmen. No me. Attached was a note. Thought you'd want to see how it's supposed to look. I laughed out loud, a full-bodied sound that startled even me. At 7 that evening, while they toasted and clinked glasses, I sat at my desk with Ruth on speakerphone reviewing documents. They moved up the asset transfer, she said. Tomorrow morning, before the ceremony. Of course they did, I replied. Once it's executed, reversing it becomes harder. I leaned back in my chair. Harder isn't impossible. No, Ruth agreed, but timing matters. I looked at the clock, then at the calendar, then at the list I'd been keeping quietly since the invitation arrived. File our response at 9 tomorrow morning, I said. That's an hour before the ceremony. Exactly. Ruth paused. This will become public. I know. You'll be painted as vindictive. I already am, I said. This just makes it official. That night I slept better than I had in months. Wednesday morning, the house buzzed with chaos. Hairstylists, makeup artists, delivery trucks, the air thick with perfume and nerves. I arrived early, dressed simply, a folder tucked under my arm. When I walked into the living room, my mother froze. What are you wearing? She asked. Appropriate attire, I replied. This isn't the time, she said. I disagree. At 9 sharp, my phone buzzed. Ruth. Filed. I exhaled slowly. Within minutes, Claire's wedding planner rushed across the lawn, phone pressed to her ear, face pale. She whispered urgently to my father, who turned toward me, eyes wide. What did you do? He demanded. I responded, I said. Responded to what? To fraud, I replied loud enough for nearby staff to hear. My mother gasped. You wouldn't. I would, I said. And I did. Claire emerged moments later, veil half-pinned, makeup unfinished. What's happening? She demanded. My father tried to intercept her, but it was too late. The asset transfer is under review, I said calmly. Pending investigation. Her face drained of color. You can't do this today, she whispered. I didn't choose today, I replied. You did. The music stopped, conversations hushed, the illusion cracked. You're ruining my wedding, she hissed. No, I said softly, I'm revealing the cost. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. That was the moment. The exact moment when she realized the version of me she'd dismissed for decades no longer existed. Around us, the lake shimmered, the lights flickered, the stage was set, but the script had changed. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting to be written back in. I was holding the pen, and the ink was finally dry enough to stain. The first thing that broke wasn't the wedding. It was the illusion of control. By 9:30 in the morning, the lake house felt smaller, the air tighter like a room where too many truths had been released at once. Phones buzzed in every corner, voices dropped to whispers that weren't quiet enough. Claire stood frozen near the staircase, her veil still half-pinned her face pale in a way makeup couldn't hide. My mother grabbed my arm and pulled me into the study, shutting the door hard behind us. "You've crossed a line," she said, her voice shaking with something that wasn't just anger. "Fear. You've humiliated us." I looked around the room. My grandmother's desk still sat beneath the window untouched. The same leather chair, the same faint smell of cedar and old paper. "No," I said calmly. I corrected a lie. "You could have waited," she snapped. "You could have handled this privately." I met her gaze. "You didn't." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in my life, she didn't have a script ready. Outside the door, I could hear Claire crying. Not softly, not gracefully. The sound was sharp, panicked, the sound of someone whose world had never been allowed to tilt before. "She's falling apart," my mother said. "Is that what you wanted?" What I wanted. I thought about that for a moment. About the years I'd spent shrinking myself so other people could feel taller. About the invitation that erased me with polite ink. About the forged signature they thought I'd never challenge. "I wanted to be seen," I said. "Everything else is a consequence." She slapped the desk with her palm. "You're being cruel." I smiled, small and tired. "No, I'm being precise." When I opened the study door, my father was waiting. His face looked older than it had an hour earlier. Lines deeper, shoulders heavier. "Talk to the lawyer," he said quietly. "We can fix this." I shook my head. "You can't fix what you didn't break." Outside, the wedding planner was on the phone again, her voice tight. Guests were beginning to arrive, their cars lining the drive, unaware they were stepping into a collapse disguised as celebration. Claire stormed towards me, mascara streaking, now veil abandoned. "You did this on purpose," she said. "You waited until today." "I waited until you forced my hand," I replied. "You're jealous," she screamed. "You've always been jealous." The word echoed off the walls. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. "I wasn't jealous," I said. "I was invisible. There's a difference." People were watching now. Bridesmaids frozen mid-step, an aunt clutching her purse, a cousin pretending to check her phone while staring openly. "This is my day," Claire sobbed. I nodded. "That's what you told yourself when you took what wasn't yours." Her fiancé stood off to the side, silent, his confusion finally outweighing his loyalty. He looked at Claire, then at my parents, then at me, like he was seeing the machinery behind the family for the first time. "What's going on?" he asked. No one answered. At 10:15, Ruth called. "They're pushing back," she said, hard. "Good," I replied. "Let them." "Be ready," she warned. "This gets messy." "It already is," I said. "I'm just cleaning it up." By 11, the ceremony was delayed. Guests shifted, murmured, checked watches. The officiant paced. The string quartet stopped playing altogether. My mother pulled me aside again, this time softer, her voice breaking. "You don't understand," she said. "Everything we've built depends on this." I looked at her. Really looked. Not as my mother, but as a woman who had spent her life managing appearances at the cost of intimacy. "Then it deserves to fall," I said gently. She recoiled like I'd struck her. At noon, an email notification chimed on my phone. Subject line simple and devastating. Estate review initiated. Distribution suspended. I exhaled slowly. Claire collapsed into a chair, her dress pooling around her like a deflated dream. "They're laughing at me," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "They're seeing you." The ceremony was officially canceled at 12:30. The officiant left. The musicians packed up. Caterers waited awkwardly, food cooling under tents that suddenly felt absurd. Guests began to drift away, murmuring apologies, confusion, curiosity. Phones came out. Pictures were taken. Stories were already forming. My father stood in the driveway, staring at the lake like it might answer him. "This will ruin us," he said. "No," I replied. "This will expose you." By mid-afternoon, the house was nearly empty. Decorations half removed, flowers wilting in the heat. The quiet was heavy, absolute. Claire locked herself in the upstairs bedroom. My mother sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, staring at nothing. I walked out onto the dock alone. The water was calm, indifferent. It didn't care about weddings or inheritances or who stood at the center of the frame. It had seen worse storms. My phone buzzed again, a message from Ruth. They're asking for settlement talks. I typed back, not today. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lake, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, relief. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for backlash. I wasn't rehearsing apologies. I wasn't waiting to be told I'd gone too far. I'd gone far enough. When I turned back toward the house, my mother was standing at the edge of the lawn. "You've changed," she said quietly. I nodded. "You forced me to." She looked at the empty space where the wedding had been, then back at me. "I don't recognize you," she said. "That's because you never really looked," I replied. That night I didn't stay. I drove back to my apartment as the sky darkened, my phone lighting up with messages I didn't read, calls I didn't answer, narratives forming without me. For once that was fine, because the revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was structural. And as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, exhaustion finally settling into my bones, I understood something with perfect clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the pivot, the moment where everything they'd built on my silence began to collapse under its own weight. And in the quiet that followed, I slept, not like someone hiding, but like someone who had finally stepped into her own name. The morning after the wedding, that wasn't the world kept moving like nothing had happened. That was the strangest part. I woke up to traffic outside my apartment, the hum of a city that didn't care who'd been humiliated at a lake house an hour away. My phone was face down on the nightstand, buzzing itself tired. I didn't touch it. I made coffee instead. Strong, black, grounding. For years, chaos in my family had always come with instructions. Fix this, smooth it over, call your sister, be the bigger person. That morning there were no instructions, just noise. When I finally turned the phone over, I had 37 missed calls and more messages than I wanted to count. My parents, Claire. Extended family members who hadn't spoken to me in years, but suddenly had opinions. A few unknown numbers. Voicemails stacked like accusations. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my work email. Monday meetings, quarterly forecasts, deadlines. The familiar structure felt almost comforting. I joined my first call on mute, camera off, and listened to colleagues debate margins and projections like the world hadn't tilted. I realized then that this was the real power shift. I could walk away. By mid-morning, Ruth called. "You've become the headline," she said, not unkindly. "Am I?" I asked. "Family business implosion, disputed inheritance, wedding canceled hours before vows," she recited. "It's circulating quietly. The kind of quietly that means everyone who matters already knows." "And legally?" I asked. "You're solid," she replied. "The forgery changed everything. Intent matters. Judges don't like being lied to." I closed my eyes. What's next? "They'll try to negotiate," she said. "They'll offer you more money, a public apology, something symbolic. And if I say no?" "They'll escalate," Ruth said. "They always do when control slips." After the call, I sat back and thought about escalation. About my family's version of it. Raised voices, threats, emotional leverage dressed up as love. I was done playing that game. At noon, there was a knock at my door. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. My mother stood in the hallway, coat buttoned wrong, hair pulled back too tightly. She looked smaller somehow. Not fragile, just diminished. "I need to talk to you," she said. "I know," I replied. "That doesn't mean I will." She flinched, then squared her shoulders. "Please." I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, taking in the apartment like it was evidence of something she'd missed. The framed certificates on the wall, the neat bookshelf, the quiet order. "You didn't answer your phone," she said. "I didn't want to," I replied. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a siren passed. "You've put us in an impossible position," she said finally. I leaned against the counter. "You put me in one first." Her eyes flashed. "Everything we did was for the family." "For which family?" I asked. She didn't answer. "We raised you both the same," she said, voice rising. "We gave you the same opportunities." "That's not true," I replied calmly. "You gave us the same expectations. You gave her the benefit of the doubt. You gave me responsibility." "That's because you could handle it," she snapped. I nodded. "Exactly." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked around my apartment at the life I'd built without their approval, and something in her expression shifted. "What do you want?" she asked again, quieter this time. The question echoed my father's from days earlier. The difference now was that I finally knew the answer. "I want distance," I said, "and honesty. She shook her head. You're tearing the family apart. No, I said. I stopped holding it together by myself. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't move. I had cried enough years for both of us. Your sister is devastated, she whispered. I believed her. That didn't change anything. She'll survive, I said. She always does. My mother stood abruptly. If you don't cooperate, this will get ugly. I smiled, not unkindly. It already did. You just weren't the one paying the price before. She left without another word. That afternoon, Claire finally texted. You think you've won? I stared at the message, then typed back. This was never a competition, that's the problem. Her response came fast. You destroyed my wedding. I didn't reply. Because what I wanted to say wouldn't land yet. And timing mattered. By evening, the first formal letter arrived. Settlement proposal. Confidential. Generous. Designed to close mouths and clean up messes quietly. I forwarded it to Ruth without comment. Her reply came a few minutes later. They're scared. Good. That night I went for a walk along the river. The water moved steadily indifferent to human drama. Couples passed me laughing. A woman jogged with her dog. Somewhere a family was probably sitting down to dinner, unaware of the fault lines running through mine. For the first time I felt something unexpected. Grief. Not for the wedding, not for the inheritance, but for the version of myself that had spent years believing proximity was the same as belonging. I sat on a bench and let it wash over me. When I got home, there was another message from Claire, longer this time. I don't know who you think you are now, but you've changed. You're cold. You don't care who you hurt. I read it twice. Then I replied, I care. I just stopped bleeding quietly. I turned the phone off after that. In bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about my grandmother again. About the way she'd once told me, almost casually, never confuse peace with silence. Silence is just fear dressed up as politeness. I understood her now. The next phase was coming. I could feel it. Lawyers, judges, public narratives, private reckonings. They would try to paint me as bitter, vindictive, ungrateful. Let them. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for authorship. And the difference mattered. Because the next move wouldn't be reactive. It would be deliberate. And this time I wouldn't be stepping into their mess. I'd be inviting it into the light, where it could finally be seen for what it was. The court date was set for a Thursday morning 2 weeks after the wedding that never happened. Not a trial, not yet, just a preliminary hearing, the kind meant to assess posture, not deliver judgment. Still, my family treated it like a public execution. Or maybe they feared it would become one. By then, the story had spread beyond whispers. It hadn't exploded into headlines, but it lived in the places that mattered. Boardrooms, country clubs, law firm hallways. People who understood power knew something had shifted. I hadn't spoken to my parents since my mother left my apartment. I hadn't spoken to Claire at all. The silence felt different now, less like avoidance, more like separation. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, not sharply, not provocatively, just clean lines, neutral colors, the kind of clothing that doesn't ask for attention but doesn't apologize for taking up space either. Ruth met me outside of the courthouse. She looked exactly the same as always, composed, focused, unimpressed by theater. They brought a full team, she said as we walked inside. I expected that, I replied. They're signaling strength. No, I said, they're signaling fear. The courtroom smelled like old paper and restraint. When we took our seats, I felt eyes on me. Curious. Evaluating. People trying to decide what kind of woman I was. The kind who cracked, or the kind who held. My parents sat 3 rows ahead, flanked by their attorneys. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. My mother glanced back once, then quickly away. Claire wasn't there. That didn't surprise me. She had never been good at rooms where applause wasn't guaranteed. The judge was brisk, no patience for dramatics. She listened. She asked pointed questions. She reviewed evidence. When the forged signature came up, there was a shift in the room. Subtle but unmistakable. Intent matters. I watched my father's shoulders slump just a fraction. When the judge ordered a full review of the estate transition and temporary suspension of all asset transfers pending investigation, there was no gavel slam, no gasps, just quiet. The most dangerous sound of all. Outside the courthouse, my mother approached me, her expression carefully neutral. This didn't need to go this far, she said. It went exactly as far as it needed to, I replied. You've made your point. I looked at her, really looked. You still don't know what my point is. She shook her head, frustrated. You've hurt your sister. I protected myself, I said. Those aren't the same thing. She turned away, then walking back toward my father without another word. That afternoon, Claire finally called. I let it ring once, twice, then I answered. You enjoy this, she said, without greeting. No, I replied. I endure it. You could stop this, she said. You could fix it. I'm not the one who broke it, I replied. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing shallow and uneven. You always think you're right, she said. I smiled not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. No, I said. I think I'm responsible. There's a difference. Her voice dropped. What do you want from me? The question landed differently coming from her. Less calculation, more fear. I want you to tell the truth, I said. About what? About the signature, I replied. About the pressure. About the entitlement. About why you thought you could erase me. She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. You wouldn't understand. I understand more than you think, I said. I just stopped pretending it was okay. Silence stretched between us. Then quietly, Mom told me you'd cave. That you always do. The words cut cleaner than any insult. I don't, I said. I adapt. She hung up. That night, the first leak happened. An anonymous tip. A quiet document shared with the wrong person. A mention of a disputed inheritance and a forged signature connected to a prominent family business. Nothing sensational, just enough to invite scrutiny. Ruth called me immediately. That wasn't me, she said. I know, I replied. You need to be careful. I am, I said, but I'm not hiding. The following days were a blur of motion. Emails, calls, legal briefings, statements drafted and revised. My parents attempted damage control. They framed it as a misunderstanding, a clerical error, a family disagreement blown out of proportion. I said nothing, because silence when chosen is different from silence imposed. On Sunday evening, my father called. His voice was tired, stripped of authority. You don't have to do this, he said. I do, I replied. He exhaled. You're tearing us apart. I closed my eyes. No, I'm refusing to be the glue. He didn't respond. Later that night, I went through my grandmother's old files again. Letters, notes, marginalia. One sentence written in her slanted hand caught my eye. If they never learn to see you, make them reckon with your absence. I sat back, the weight of it settling in my chest. The reckoning wasn't over. The judge had opened the door. The investigation would take months, but the real shift had already happened. They could no longer pretend I was irrelevant, and that terrified them. Because once a woman stops begging to be included, she becomes impossible to manage. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, calm and steady. The next chapter wouldn't be about what they lost. It would be about what I claimed, and I was ready. The investigation changed the temperature of everything. Before, my family treated me like a problem to manage. Now they treated me like a variable they could no longer control. There's a subtle difference between the two, and it shows up in the way people speak to you. Slower, more careful, less dismissive. It would have been satisfying if it hadn't been so hollow. 2 days after the court hearing, I received an email from the board of Whitman Holdings requesting my presence at a special meeting. Not asking, requesting. The wording mattered. I had never been invited to a board meeting before. Not officially. I'd been consulted, asked to review numbers, handed problems to solve behind the scenes. But this was different. This was public. Ruth raised an eyebrow when I forwarded her the email. They're pivoting, she said, from what I asked. From erasing you, she replied, to containing you. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at the downtown office. The building itself had always intimidated me as a child. Glass and steel security desks, names etched into marble. It had been my father's kingdom, my grandmother's fortress. Now it was just a place. I arrived early not to prove anything, but because I wanted to see who showed up on time. Power reveals itself in punctuality. The board members filtered in, most of them men who had watched me grow up without ever learning my name. Their expressions ranged from wary to politely neutral. My father sat at the head of the table. He didn't look at me when I entered. When the meeting began, the chairman cleared his throat. We're here to discuss continuity, he said, and governance. I smiled inwardly. Continuity, another word people use when they're afraid of change. They spoke for a while about numbers, projections, market confidence, the usual choreography. Then the conversation turned inevitably to the estate. The ongoing dispute, one man said, choosing his words carefully, poses reputational risk. I raised my hand slightly. The room stilled. With respect, I said, my voice calm. The risk isn't the dispute. The risk is pretending governance doesn't matter. A few heads turned. My father shifted in his seat. The trustee role exists for a reason, I continued. My grandmother understood that families confuse loyalty with accountability. She built safeguards. Someone coughed. Another checked his notes. Are you suggesting mismanagement? The chairman asked. I'm suggesting oversight, I replied, which is my responsibility. Silence settled over the table. Then unexpectedly, one of the older board members spoke. A man who had known my grandmother longer than any of them. She always trusted Emily, he said she had the spine for it. My father's jaw tightened. The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. I wasn't dismissed. I wasn't placated. I was acknowledged. That afternoon, Claire showed up at my apartment. I hadn't invited her. She stood in the hallway like a stranger, eyes rimmed red, posture defensive. You look fine, she said, like nothing happened. I studied her. She looked smaller without the wedding trappings, less certain. I am fine, I replied. She scoffed. Of course you are. You always land on your feet. I stepped aside. Do you want to talk or perform? She flinched, then walked in. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between sisters is different, heavier, loaded with history no one else understands. I didn't forge your signature, she said finally. I waited. Mom did, she continued. She said it was necessary, that you'd overreact. There it was, the hidden truth surfacing at last. And you let her, I said. Claire's eyes filled. I didn't think you'd do this. I didn't think you'd erase me, I replied. She sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. I didn't want to hurt you. That doesn't matter, I said gently. You did. She looked up at me, eyes raw. What happens now? I considered her. This was the moment she expected absolution, the moment she expected me to clean up what she'd broken like always. I don't know, I said honestly, but it doesn't involve me saving you. She nodded slowly as if absorbing a foreign concept. I feel like everything's falling apart, she whispered. I leaned against the counter, not unkind, not yielding. That's what happens when foundations were built on favoritism. She left an hour later without asking for forgiveness, without offering one either. It was the most honest interaction we'd ever had. That night my mother called. I didn't answer. Instead, I went through my grandmother's journals again. Not the legal ones, the personal ones. Pages filled with observations about people, about power, about regret. One entry stopped me cold. I loved my children. I did not like the people they became when they thought love meant exemption. I closed the book and sat in the dark. The next morning, the second leak hit. This one more pointed. Details about the forgery, whispers of an internal power struggle. A mention of the trustee who refused to play along. My name didn't appear, but my presence was implied. Ruth called. They're scrambling. I know, I said. Your parents' council wants mediation. After the review, I replied. You're not backing down. No, I said. I'm stepping forward. By the end of the week, offers began to arrive. Quiet ones. Promises of compensation. Shares. Seats. Apologies wrapped in legal language. I didn't accept any of them, because revenge had never been my end goal. Restoration was, not of the family, of myself. As I stood by my window that night, city lights blinking on below, I felt something solid settle in my chest. I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. And the next choice I made would change more than an inheritance. It would change the narrative they'd been telling about me my entire life. And this time I would tell it myself. Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It waits. It watches. And then it asks a simple question. What will you do now that you're no longer afraid? I didn't know the answer right away. For weeks after the board meeting, my life existed in a strange suspension. The investigation moved forward with the slow certainty of something designed to outlast outrage. Lawyers talked, documents surfaced, narratives hardened. My parents stopped calling entirely. Claire sent one text that read, only, I'm staying with a friend. I didn't respond. At work, something unexpected happened. People started listening to me differently. It wasn't because they'd read anything. Most of them hadn't. It was because I stopped volunteering explanations. I stopped cushioning statements. I stopped smiling to make things easier to swallow. When I spoke, it was clean, direct, unapologetic. And it worked. One afternoon, my managing director asked me to stay after a meeting. He closed the glass door of his office and leaned against the desk, studying me like I'd just solved a puzzle he hadn't realized was there. You're different lately, he said. I know, I replied. Not worse, he added quickly, sharper. I waited. We're restructuring a division, he continued. There's resistance, politics, the usual. And you want me to clean it up, I said. He smiled faintly. I want you to run it. The offer landed quietly. No fanfare, no congratulations, just an opening. Why me, I asked. Because you don't flinch, he said. And because you don't confuse loyalty with performance. I thought about my grandmother, about the word spine for it. I'll consider it, I said. That night my father called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me knew this wasn't another demand, it was something else, something thinner. Your mother moved out, he said without preamble. I closed my eyes. Where did she go? Her sisters, he replied. She said she needs space. The irony was almost cruel. And you, I asked? I stayed, he said. Someone has to keep the house. We sat in silence for a moment. The sound of a man realizing too late that silence doesn't protect you forever. She didn't mean for things to go this far, he said. I exhaled slowly. Intent doesn't undo impact. I know, he replied, and for the first time it didn't sound like a defense. He hesitated, then said, Your mother forged the signature. I know, I said. She said she did it to protect Claire. And who was protecting me, I asked quietly. He didn't answer. I failed you, he said finally. The words were small, unpracticed. I let them sit between us. I'm not asking for an apology, I said. I'm asking for truth. That is the truth, he replied. We ended the call without resolution. But something had cracked. Not enough to heal anything, enough to let air in. 2 days later, the investigator requested an in-person interview. Ruth came with me, but she barely spoke. I didn't need her to. They asked about timelines, about access, about the dynamics of the family business. I answered everything calmly, precisely, without embellishment. When the interview ended, one of them looked at me and said, You understand this isn't just about inheritance. I do, I replied. It's about accountability. He nodded. Outside, Ruth touched my arm. You did well. I know, I said, and meant it. That evening, Claire called again. This time her voice was different. Not sharp, not defensive, just tired. I didn't know how bad it was, she said. I told you, I replied. You always told me, she said. I just didn't listen. I leaned against the counterphone, pressed to my ear, the weight of decades sitting between us. They're investigating Mom, she continued. She says she did it for me. But I didn't ask her to. You benefited, I said. That matters. I know, she whispered. There was a long pause. Then, what do you want from me? The question again. Everyone wanted to know the price of my silence. I want you to stop letting them use you as a shield, I said. And I want you to stop pretending I was the problem. She swallowed. I don't know how to do that. Learn, I replied, like I had to. We ended the call there. No forgiveness, no absolution, just truth raw and unfinished. The next week the report was finalized. Forgery confirmed. Improper influence documented. Recommendation for restructuring trustee oversight and temporary removal of my parents from operational control pending further review. It wasn't dramatic. It was devastating. The board called an emergency session. This time they didn't request my presence. They insisted. When I walked into the room, my father stood. Emily, he said. I nodded. Dad. The chairman cleared his throat. Given the findings, we need interim leadership. Silence. I'll take the role, I said. Every eye turned toward me. My father looked like he might object. Then he didn't. On one condition, I added. Full transparency, no family exceptions. The vote was unanimous. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city humming below, the weight of it all settling in. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. What I felt was grounded, because revenge isn't loud when it's real. It's structural. It rearranges who has to answer questions, who has to explain themselves, who has to live with consequences. I thought about my grandmother again, about how she'd once told me, never mistake endurance for virtue. Sometimes endurance is just waiting for permission to stop suffering. I didn't need permission anymore. The story was no longer about what they took from me. It was about what I was building without them. And the foundation was finally mine. Power feels different when it's finally yours. Not intoxicating, not loud. It settles instead like a weight you've trained for without knowing it. The first morning I walked into Whitman Holdings as interim head of operations, no one clapped. No one smiled too wide. They nodded. They waited. That told me everything. I didn't redecorate the office. I didn't move into my father's corner suite. I kept my old desk, my old chair, my old habits. Change doesn't announce itself with furniture. It announces itself with decisions. The first decision I made was simple. I asked for the truth. Every department head was instructed to submit a full operational review. No spin, no filters, no family shielding. Just numbers, contracts, risks. Some people resisted, most didn't. They'd been waiting longer than I realized. By the end of the first week, the picture was clear. The company wasn't failing, but it was rotting quietly from favoritism and fear. Promotions stalled, talent bled out. Bad decisions went unchallenged because challenging them meant challenging my parents. That era was over. When I announced the changes, I didn't frame them as punishment. I framed them as reality. Roles reassigned, contracts reviewed, long-standing vendors replaced. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. The backlash came quickly. My mother called the board. My father tried to reason with me in private. Distant relatives surfaced with opinions they'd been saving for years. Some accused me of revenge, others of ambition. They weren't wrong, but they were incomplete. One afternoon, my mother showed up at the office unannounced. She stood in the lobby like she used to stand at the edges of my life, assuming access without asking. The receptionist looked at me through the glass wall, unsure. I nodded once. She entered my office and closed the door behind her. "So this is how it ends," she said, looking around. "You take everything." I folded my hands on the desk. "No, I take responsibility." "You always twist words," she snapped. "No," I said. "I finally stopped letting you." She paced the room, heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You're punishing us." "I'm correcting structure," I replied. "You're confusing the two because you've never been held accountable." She turned on me, then eyes blazing. "You think you're better than us." I met her gaze. "I think I'm done being smaller so you don't feel threatened." Her mouth opened ready with something sharp, then she stopped. For the first time, I saw it. Not anger, fear. The fear of a woman who had built her identity on control and realized too late that control isn't love. "You've lost your family," she said quietly. I exhaled. "No, I lost an illusion." She left without another word. That night, Claire came to see me. Not at the office, at my apartment. She stood in the doorway awkwardly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed inside anymore. "They're blaming you for everything," she said. "I know," I replied. "They say you planned this, that you waited for the perfect moment." I smiled faintly. "They taught me timing." She sat down slowly. "I don't know who they are without the company." "That's not my problem," I said gently. She looked up at me. "I don't know who I am either." The honesty startled me more than any accusation. "You don't have to," I said. "Not yet." She nodded, eyes filling. "I'm sorry." It wasn't a perfect apology, it wasn't clean, but it was real. "I know," I said. She left an hour later, lighter than she arrived, and for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for fixing what she carried with her. Weeks passed. The investigation wrapped. The findings were final. My mother was formally censured. My father stepped down from his role quietly without ceremony. The press never picked it up. The story died the way most real consequences do. Without applause. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I drove out to the lake house alone. The property was locked. The water still. The place felt different now, empty but honest. I walked through the room slowly, memories rising and settling without sting. This house had held too many lies to deserve nostalgia. I locked the door behind me and left the key with the caretaker. I didn't need it anymore. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights come on one by one. The phone buzzed. A message from my managing director. "Still want the division lead role?" I typed back, "Yes," because this time the ambition wasn't borrowed, it was mine. Later, another message came in, from my father. "I see you now, I should have sooner." I read it once, then again. I didn't reply. Some truths don't need responses. They just need to be acknowledged. As night settled in, I thought about everything that had brought me here. The invitation, the erasure, the forged signature, the wedding that never happened. The inheritance that wasn't the point after all. Revenge hadn't come from destruction. It had come from clarity. From refusing to carry what wasn't mine. From choosing myself without apology. And as I turned off the lights and let the quiet fill the room, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. But it was the end of being written out of it. Success has a strange way of rearranging silence. In the weeks after my appointment became permanent, the noise around me faded. No more urgent calls, no more legal threats disguised as concern, no more carefully worded messages asking if we could reset. People stopped trying to negotiate with my guilt once they realized it no longer answered. That was when the reckoning turned inward. Running a division isn't glamorous. It's meetings and margins, late nights and uncomfortable conversations. It's telling people no when they're used to hearing yes because of who they know. It's watching resentment surface in places you didn't expect and competence rise in people who'd been overlooked. I was good at it. Not because I was ruthless, because I was fair. And fairness, I learned, feels like cruelty to those who've never been held to it. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a contract with legal, my assistant knocked and said my father was here. No appointment, no warning. I considered saying no, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Then I surprised myself. Send him in, I said. He looked smaller in my office. Not diminished, just unarmored. He didn't sit right away. He stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back like a man waiting for a verdict. You're doing well, he said. I know, I replied. He nodded. The board talks about you. That's their job, I said. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, then disappeared. I should have stepped in sooner. Yes, I said simply. He winced, but didn't argue. Progress. I let your mother run things because it was easier, he admitted. She was decisive. She was controlling, I corrected. He exhaled. I told myself it was leadership. I leaned back in my chair. It was avoidance. Silence filled the room, not hostile, just honest. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I just didn't want to leave things unsaid. I studied him for a moment. The man who had taught me how to ride a bike, how to balance a checkbook, how to stay quiet when things got uncomfortable. You didn't protect me, I said, but you can stop protecting the lie. He nodded slowly. I will. When he left, I didn't feel relief. I felt resolution. Some conversations don't heal wounds. They close doors. That evening, Claire came over again. This time she brought wine. She sat on the floor instead of the couch, her back against the cabinet, like she wasn't ready to take up space yet. I quit my job, she said. I raised an eyebrow. That was fast. They offered me another role, she continued. A favor. I said no. That caught my attention. I don't want to be carried anymore, she said quietly. I don't know who I am without it. I thought about that. About how long it had taken me to answer that same question. You won't like the answer at first, I said. She smiled faintly. I figured. We drank in silence for a while. No accusations. No history lessons. Just two women sitting in the aftermath of something neither of us could undo. Do you hate me? She asked eventually. I shook my head. I don't trust you yet. There's a difference. She nodded, accepting it without argument. That too was new. As autumn settled in, the company stabilized. Morale improved. People stopped whispering in hallways and started speaking in meetings. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was honest. And honesty, I'd learned, was the real inheritance. One night, sorting through old boxes, I found the invitation again. The cream paper was creased now, the gold lettering dulled. I held it for a moment, then tore it in half, slowly, deliberately. Not in anger, in closure. I threw it away and washed my hands like I was done touching something contaminated. On a quiet Sunday morning, I went back to the lake. Not to the house, just the water. I sat on the dock with a thermos of coffee, watching the surface ripple under a pale sky. My grandmother's voice drifted back to me unbidden. Never build your life where you need permission to exist. I smiled. I didn't know what came next. Bigger roles, different cities, maybe a family of my own, maybe not. The point wasn't certainty anymore. The point was choice. When my phone buzzed, it was a message from the board chair. We're planning a long-term succession discussion. Your name is at the top. I didn't reply right away. I watched the water a little longer, felt the weight of everything that had fallen away. Then I typed back, let's talk. Because I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore, and I wasn't afraid of being alone. I had learned the difference between belonging and ownership, between love and control, between silence and peace. And that knowledge, hard-won and deeply earned, was something no one could ever take from me again. The thing about quiet victories is that they don't announce themselves. They arrive the way morning does, slowly, without asking permission, until one day you realize the darkness never came back. The succession meeting happened in late November, on a gray morning that smelled like rain and endings. I walked into the boardroom with my notes neatly stacked, my mind steady. No armor, no rehearsed defenses. I wasn't there to fight for a title. I was there to decide whether I wanted it. That alone told me how far I'd come. The discussion was methodical. Timelines, governance models, risk mitigation. No one mentioned my family by name, but their absence was loud. The old power structures had been dismantled so quietly that people were still adjusting to the silence they left behind. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't sell myself. I told the truth. I'm not interested in inheriting authority, I said. I'm interested in earning trust. If that's not what this role is about, I'm not the right person. The room stayed still. Then the chairman nodded. That, he said, is exactly why you are. They offered me the role. official, long-term, no qualifiers. I asked for time. Not because I doubted myself, but because I respected the choice. That evening, I went home and opened my windows, letting the cold air in. The city below was already dressed for the holidays, lights strung between buildings, people rushing with purpose. Somewhere, families were gathering around tables filled with expectations and old wounds dressed up as tradition. I didn't feel bitter. I felt free. Claire came over later that night. She looked different these days. Not lighter exactly, but more grounded, like someone learning how to stand without leaning. "They're offering you the top job," she said. "They are," I replied. "You're going to take it," she said, not a question. "Probably," I said. She smiled, a real one this time. "You deserve it." The words landed gently, no edge, no competition. "Thank you," I said. She hesitated at the door before leaving. "For what it's worth," she said, "I see it now. What they did to you, what I let them do." I didn't rush to absolve her. I didn't punish her either. "I believe you," I said. "Keep going." After she left, I sat alone with a glass of wine and thought about my parents. About my mother still clinging to control like it was oxygen. About my father finally learning the cost of silence. About the house that no longer held me. About the family narrative that had tried to define me and failed. I didn't hate them. I just didn't belong to their version of love anymore. A week later, I accepted the role. The announcement went out quietly. No press release, no celebration. Just an internal memo that marked a new chapter without pretending the old one hadn't existed. On my first official day, I arrived early, unlocked my office, and sat at the desk in silence. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt present. At lunch, I walked outside and ate on a bench watching people pass. A woman about my age sat nearby, crying softly into her phone. I didn't know her story, but I recognized the posture. The way grief folds you inward when you've been taught not to make noise. I wanted to tell her something. That survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself quietly over and over until one day it doesn't hurt anymore. That night I went home and packed away the last of the old documents. Legal files, notes, evidence I no longer needed. I kept one thing, my grandmother's journal. I opened it to the last page she'd written. "If you are reading this and wondering whether you went too far, you didn't. You only went where others refused to follow." I closed the book and smiled. The holidays came and went without incident. No invitations, no dramatic gestures, just space. Honest, clean space. On New Year's Eve, I stood on my balcony watching fireworks bloom over the city, each one loud and fleeting. I thought about how much of my life I'd spent waiting for permission, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be acknowledged. I raised my glass not to revenge but to release, because revenge had never been the point. Justice had been. And justice, I learned, isn't about making someone else feel small. It's about refusing to stay small yourself. If you're listening to this story, and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever been excluded, overlooked, or quietly erased by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to hear this. You are not dramatic for noticing patterns. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not wrong for choosing dignity over silence. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming someone who no longer needs to be invited. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories about justice, karma, and the quiet strength it takes to reclaim your life. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and have you ever had to fight to be seen in your own family? Because if you have, then you already know. Your voice was never the problem. It was the silence around it.